This is going to be all about books that I've loved, liked, and haven't been so hot on in the month of October. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network. I'm, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and it's In a Nutshell time, where I talk about everything I read in the month of October and a couple of the things I'm still reading and will be reading in November as well. At the end of the video, there'll be the random Patreon pick, which, you want to stick around and check out what random book I'll have to read in the month of November. But in my last video, I had an update where I was just admitting that I have been struggling mentally and physically. And while things are not perfect and it's still a process, and on the mental side, it'll always be a process and always be an effort, things are trending in the right direction. And I wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you dropped a comment, sent a message in any way, showed your support, or shared your own experiences, I just want to tell you that it means the absolute most to me. And I really can't thank you all enough. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson, Secret Project number 3. I did not back the Kickstarter, but somehow I've ended up reading 2 of the 4 that have come out, and I will be reading Sunlit Man as well, because I think it's probably going to, be something I want to check out, because I've heard there's certain connections to other Sanderson books that I like. But Yumi was just okay. It's certainly not my favorite Sanderson, and I'm not saying there's anything that I really hated about the book. There were moments where the setting and the world building actually were really, really enjoyable, but there was a ton of stuff in the middle that I just wasn't super keen on. Brandon Sanderson has a meathead side character in this story about halfway through, and I'm just saying I am available, Sanderson. If you ever need a dude bro sensitivity reader, I'm your guy, because you got some stuff wrong. I mean, basic exercise names, hey, you can't be an expert in everything, but come on, hire me on. I can help you out with these things. A lap press? Really, dude? This book is essentially Cosmere Freaky Friday. Maybe not exactly, but it's a body swap story, and it's very closely tied to an anime that Sanderson is a massive fan of. I think this book would have been one that I ended up really liking had the ending not fallen into kind of a same formula or situation that Brandon Sanderson has in a lot of his novels that I just don't seem to care for. So for me, this is just okay at best. And I'm not mad I read it, but I don't think I'll think about this ever again. The random Patreon pick of the month for October was Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. Book 1 in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, I believe, with book 3 on its way soon. Richard Swan's debut. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this. I do not think it is a perfect book. I don't think it was firing on all cylinders. There are certain things where he kind of fell into what a lot of debuts do, just with piecing things together and trying to balancing, world building, character development, and the plot all at once. It's a difficult task, and he sets out to do something pretty cool here, which is mix a little bit of old fantasy style with kind of a detective story, which I liked. If there's one thing I would point out about this story that just didn't seem to wow me was honestly a lot of the setting and the areas we were going didn't feel as distinct as I would have liked them to. I don't think this is a fantasy we're going to step into and be like, I've never seen anything like this, but it still does have aspects of it that excel greatly, and that's why I really like this book. You have a traveling justice going around and basically dealing out the law to different towns and just on the road. And that is a premise I can get behind. I even have a story idea that I've been sitting on for a long time that's kind of similar to this. It goes in a much bleaker direction, but the main character is actually the one who is remembering the story and chronicling it to us, which is the justice assistant, a young female who has been rescued. And this is a land that has been through wars, and now there's been an empire that's exists for about, I think, a century, maybe 2 centuries. But a lot of the issues between the different factions of people still exist. I've seen a lot of people claim that this book is a bit boring, and I kind of understand what they're saying, not because I found it to be boring. I actually really, I pretty much didn't put it down the whole time. I read a lot of it every single day until I got through it, but chronicling tales tend to have a little bit more passive language. You're going to have a lot of hads. And was and whatever else. So it feels a little less active. Plus, you're in a solo POV, therefore maybe you get bored, or if you don't like the main character, then that could definitely be a problem. But for me, I did find it not just enjoyable from the writing standpoint, but also just kind of entertaining. I think Swan has a lot of potential, which is really what I'm looking for whenever I read a debut, and maybe some original ideas. And I'm excited not just for the next book in this series, but I'm also very much excited for what he does after the Empire of the Wolf. I would like to see where he branches out to and what he goes for, because I do think that there's a lot of just raw talent there. When this book leans into the more horror aspects and then wondering what is in the afterlife and those elements, that's where this book is at its best, and that's the things that hooked me and will get me to continue on in the series. Night of Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. Thank you, Evie, for sending me this. I really appreciate it. This is kind of my spooky season read. I've done a lot of spooky stuff. I actually read a decent amount last month, like with Sand Kings and some other stuff. But Night of the Mannequins was the real spooky season read. I tried to not just do another Stephen King like I do every year. And this is the second time I've read Stephen Graham Jones, first being The Only Good Indians. And I like Night of the Mannequins way more, actually. And I enjoyed Only Good Indians quite a bit. But I love this book. This book has polarizing ratings on Goodreads, to say the least. You know when a book is in that 3 range on Goodreads that it's a lot of 5 and 1 stars, and that's usually a good... It's for me to consider that I may love the book, because I just happen to love like 3.6s on Goodreads, and this is no exception. This book is not some slapstick horror story about dolls murdering people. It's actually a lot more than that, and I do think that the expectation from the title ends up steering people in the wrong direction, and maybe they feel a bit had. I didn't feel that way. I thought this was so compelling with an unreliable narrator, and it is a short book, 130-something pages, that was so readable and written in the style of what the main character would be saying, like, and how they would think and speak. Awesome. I really love this book. It made me think, and I think this is a book that's crafted for reading carefully. You will know that something is up, but if you are not curious about that, I think at the end of the book, you'd be like, didn't make any sense. I'm over it. But if you think about it carefully, I think it's actually really cool. And there are some suspensions of disbelief, but I didn't think that they were that egregious personally. So this is a book that surprised me, and I don't know. This might have been my favorite book of them. It's up there with in the competition. So this is absolutely getting the nut button. The Phoenix on the Sword by Robert E. Howard. That is right. I have finally read some Robert E. Howard. I've read some Conan, so all you older guys can stop yelling at me to read Conan now. Are you happy? This is a very short story, and I don't have a ton to say about it. I thought it was pretty good. The one thing that I did love about this story was the writing style. I think Robert E. Howard's writing is just magnificent, and it makes me want to read more of his stuff. This is also extraordinarily short, which is a plus. I enjoyed the dialogue for the most part, even though, it went on a little long at times, people giving a little bit of monologues, but I don't really mind that as much. And the little bit of world building that we get was quite enjoyable. I like the setting of this. I know there's an essay about the history of Conan. I read a little bit of it, but I decided just to go ahead and jump into the story. But this is a world that I'm excited to get into and see what Howard does with it. I know there's some things that maybe don't age as well in Conan, but I've also heard that there's some fabulous stories, and this being one of them. And I can see that here. I did enjoy this quite a bit. And I think as someone who wants to write shorter fiction, this is probably an example that I should take to heart and study. Conan, legendary. Everyone knows it. And now I can see why, at least a little bit. And I will continue to formulate more opinions as I read more Conan. Leaving Las Vegas by John O'Brien. This is a contemporary fiction, literary fiction, whatever you want to call it, just fiction. And it's about a prostitute who wants nothing more than to live and find new ways to live and keep surviving, and an alcoholic man who wants nothing more than to end his life. These two forces meet in the city of high rollers, and that is, of course, Las Vegas. Unfortunately, there also low rollers seem to get the biggest brunt of the city. This is the most harrowing depiction of alcoholism that I have ever read, and it was deeply, deeply disturbing. This is not for the weak of heart, and honestly, I'm not even sure who I recommend this to. There were times where I found the writing to be so personal and stylized and beautiful and exciting, and then also times where I felt like it was so erratic and at times even jarring and maybe even slightly over the top, and I am just so conflicted on this book overall. I don't think this book will ever leave my memory. That's one thing I have to say, is just the human nature of this book and some of the truths that are spoken that are so dark and deep, I have not found anywhere else, and for that, it is a remarkable book. I don't know if I like this book, and I don't know if I recommend it to you, and I also am not even sure if the writing is all the way great. It's somewhere maybe in between. Maybe there's flashes of brilliance, but the thing that makes this book one that I wanted to pick up is the story behind it, and that is that the author, John O'Brien, wrote this book, and then in 1994, I believe at the age of 34, he might have been 36, it was 34 or 36 years old, he committed suicide, and it's just a tragic tale of an author. And this was made into a movie with Nicolas Cage in 1995. I don't know if he knew about the deal before he passed away, but knowing that that was his fate, and then he wrote a story about this topic, it's just deeply touching. And it's also scary, to put it in any other way. And as someone who has suffered from this type of thought pattern before, very real. but still a different look because everyone suffers differently. And I have to imagine that John O'Brien put a piece of himself in this book. And for that, I wanted to give it attention, at least personally, and experience it. And yeah, it's an interesting book at the very least. Fall of the Conciliator, Book 2 in the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. This was a largely great experience for me, and I would say that the very first half of this book is my favorite thing that Gene Wolfe has done so far in Book of the New Sun, and out of the two books, the best section. Until there's like a capturing event, I really was like, wow, this could end up being Book of the Year. I loved it so much. I did not love, however, the second half of the book nearly as much as the first half. I still enjoyed it, but there were just some things that went over my head, and then other times wherever I just felt downright a little bit lost. And that happened to be whenever a certain play happens in the second half of the book. And I know a lot of people really love it, and I have a feeling with more context I could too. But for one, I don't really like plays. And two, I didn't understand really a thing that was going on because I'm a moron. So even though I liked book one as a whole more, there were still moments in this book that were my favorite of the series. And as always, very distraught and compelling moral questions coming from Severian, the narrator. And I cannot wait to continue into book 3 and 4 and see what else Gene Wolfe is going to throw at me. Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy is the fourth to last book that I needed to read of his. Now I still have 3 left, which is Cities on the Plain and then his latest 2 novels. And then I will be done with his novels. And I don't know how to feel about that. I feel sad, like the ending of a journey almost. Outer Dark is one that I was really interested in getting to because some of the people I share taste with is this is their favorite McCarthy. I've also seen people absolutely hate this book, which that's just Cormac McCarthy being Cormac McCarthy, making people argue, right? This is a tale presumably about a brother and sister in the Appalachian Mountains, maybe at the turn of the century, and is written in a way that reflects not only the time in history, but also the people and the culture and the way they speak. And without a doubt, has some of my favorite atmosphere from a Cormac McCarthy novel. This book starts out with the sister bearing her brother's child. So like all Cormac books, this is pretty dark stuff, obviously. And then these two individuals go on their own separate journeys while going against forces that are coming after them in search of things. In some cases, it's obvious what they're in search of, and in other cases, maybe not so much. Maybe a little bit more of a symbolic search for the character. Outer Dark excels in its themes, atmosphere, and then, of course, that stylized dialogue that I think Cormac McCarthy is emulating a bit of William Faulkner in that. And I think he delivers. I think this has some of those Cormac McCarthy passages that are a little wild and out there, content-wise, but also it was pretty straightforward to follow, and I think it gives you a lot to think about. This one also felt very biblical. I'd rank it to the middle to top of his works. Certainly not my favorite, but definitely above the average for me. So I'm very happy with this book, and I'm also very sad that I only have a few left. Under the Dome by Stevie Cocaine Cowboy King. I've been excited for a very long time to read Under the Dome because I think the premise is just really interesting. I knew going into it that the ending is one of his, I would say, more poorly received endings, but as someone who's not a big stickler for endings and also is now been forewarned, so I'm bracing for it, I wasn't all that worried about it. This book has some of the things that I love most about Stephen King, which is the dark side of humanity, town building, dialogue between characters that just feels fast and quick and real, and also, of course, that really cool premise. If you don't know what this book's about, it's essentially about a town that gets entrapped in this dome for no apparent reason. And then chaos ensues from there, power struggles, greed, humans being humans, you could say. But Stephen King also balances this out with some hope and people coming together and having, a cause for the common good and fighting against some of those people who are leaning a bit more into the evil side. My favorite part of this book, honestly, might have been the first half, maybe 200 pages. There is a beginning of this book when the event happens, and then we just jump through every single POV imaginable to see how this event impacted them, impacted normal life, what was like in the second that it happened. And I actually thought that stuff was fantastic. Unfortunately, there were times where I also felt exhausted reading this book, mainly due to its sheer size and then not going as wide as I thought we would. It actually was a pretty encapsulated, get it Under the Dome encapsulated. It was a little bit of a more narrower story than I thought that it would be, and I kind of wanted to see more along the lines of the premise. And maybe just more variance in the POVs possibly. I also thought the antagonist, while extremely hateable, felt a little bit redundant. Overall, I did actually have fun reading this book, and I'm glad that I read it, but it's nowhere near one of my favorites from King. I could see myself rereading this in the future, though. I know that sounds weird, but I don't know. I think maybe with the right expectations, I can enjoy it a little bit more. Also, the ending, it's not great. It's not good, but I also didn't think it was as, like, just horrible as some people had said. I respect your opinion if you think that, but maybe because I was braced for it, and also I don't know. How else are you going to end it? I'm not sure. I thought the ending was just, whatever. The Killer Angels by Michael Shera is a Pulitzer Prize winner in the 1960s, and it is all about the Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War. We are going to be following multiple POVs in this book around the battle, both from North and South. This was recommended to me by Steve Donahue because I asked him, you hate every book that I like, so maybe you should give me a recommendation. I'll try it out. And I have to say, this book was outstanding. I'm just going to tell you now, it gets the nut button without a doubt. Historical accuracy is something that I am not going to comment on because I haven't done enough research about it to know. I do know the movie Gettysburg is either directly based on this book or is somehow in some way inspired by this book. So I am going to read more about that. I'm actually going to go to Gettysburg because this fired me up and it's not terribly far from where I live. So I won't comment on historical accuracy, but as a novel, I think that this is just amazing. Possibly the best combat scenes that I have ever read, but way beyond that, because honestly, I'm not the biggest combat fan. When it's done well, of course, like anything, I can like it, but it is way more important to talk about the human elements of this book and the time spent discussing motive and fear and responsibility and, of course, sacrifice. It was hard not to feel a lump in my chest and think about my country's history as this story went along, and I felt very moved by the entire thing. I love this book. I see why I won a Pulitzer, and I'm so happy that I did read it. And if you have any interest in historical fiction around the Civil War, I haven't read a lot of it, so I can't say this is the best of the bunch or anything, but a lot of people seem to think that, and I think it could be well worth your time. Also, the audiobook for this was fantastic. The final book that I completed, we're almost done, folks. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is an award winner and famous and a giant in the science fiction genre, as is Le Guin herself. And I really enjoyed this book. I would say that I loved elements of this book, and I think I would love it all on a reread, possibly. It's a story of a single emissary coming in from kind of like an intergalactic union that wants to bring in this alien planet Winter into the fold, and they are way different than anything that our emissary has ever contacted before. One thing I want to say is I actually love the fact that this, I'm going to use the word empire, even though I don't think that's exactly what this is, sending one person to seem non-threatening and not actually just being like colonizing assholes, for lack of a better term. Like, to see it done in a different way is kind of refreshing. And then to be in a story with an emissary who I can kind of relate to, but is a part of this intergalactic union that I've never been a part of. So I'm trying to connect with this emissary. And then we get thrown onto this planet where essentially this population for a large portion of time is genderless. But it's not just that. It's also about violence and power and government and relationships and other systems and how gender is tied to such a thing or not tied to such a thing. This book has so much to offer, and not least of which is in the world building. I was shocked by the level of detail. I had heard some people say this book was a bit dry, and as someone who isn't very imaginative when they read, I found myself taking time with just the spot-on descriptions. I mean, really painting it out there for you, for me to kind of visualize this planet. And I don't know if I did a great job of it, but I do think the level of detail for the world building is really impressive. Not just in what it looks like and feels like, but how it works and the differences between the places on the planet itself. I did not think that this plot was the most entertaining. I'm not going to pretend like I did, but sometimes you read a book for more than that, and that's cool. And in that way, this book has that in spades. This is my first foray into Le Guin sci-fi, and it was a major success, and I will be continuing on. The Dispossessed is on there. The word for world is forest, and a couple other stories. I have a bunch of her bind up, so just more Le Guin coming shortly because I'm very motivated to read her stuff right now. I had a Chatting with Nuts episode with Jared Henderson that you can check out here on the channel, and we talked a lot about Ursula K. Le Guin, and it definitely motivated me. A book that I haven't finished as of filming this, because I'm filming it right before Halloween, that I wanted to go over, and I will finish it by the time this video is posted, is Night in Lonesome October by Roger Zelazny. And I have 2 more chapters because it's 31 chapters. You can read a chapter a day in October. And I actually feel like reading that the book that way may have impacted my enjoyment of it, because this is not my favorite Zelazny book by a long shot. I don't know if this is the type of story for me. I've never been a big fan of like the horror genre whenever it's taken, I don't want to say made light of, because that sounds silly, but like some comedy thrown in there. Like I've never been a big fan of like horror comedy. And that's very much what some of this reads as. It is funny. Like there are times where I laughed, but overall, I just never could get my feet in this story. And I do think it's because I read a chapter a day. The writing is great. The dialogue is crisp, and a lot of it is funny. You're in a POV of a dog, which kind of tells you where Zelazny's head was at the time. But it is not maybe the book for me. I think there's an audience for it, though. I think there's a large audience for it. And I'm sad that I didn't love this book, because this is Zelazny's last work. And I have come to appreciate a lot of what he has written. But I in no way, shape, or form think that this is bad. I actually think more people would enjoy it if they would give it a shot. I don't know. Maybe I'll read this again next year and not read it one chapter a day. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Patreon pick of the month, our favorite time of the month here at the Fantasy Network. And I just want to give a big shout out to all my patrons. The support that you give me here on the channel has helped out tremendously in upgrading stuff on the channel and making this hopefully a better viewing experience for you. And I just deeply appreciate it. So let's see what my patrons have in store for me. And I'll be selecting a random book from my Night's Watching Kingsguard's list. And I always love this because it expands my horizons more times than not. So let's see what y'all got in store for me. Last month I did a phone call, and I called Alan and had him pick a number, and I actually really liked that. But the problem is that I can't guarantee anyone's going to pick up the phone, and also you can't really hear the audio. So I'm not saying I'll never do it again, but maybe I'll need to do like a Zoom call or something, so you can actually hear them picking it, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm rigging it or whatever. And the winner is number 37, and that is Benjamin K. And the book is Disgrace. I have no idea what this book is, but I'm going to Google it right now. All right, I'm not going to go into everything that this book's about, but it looks like it's very popular. It's like 320 pages. It's written by J.M. Coetzee, if that's how you say the name of it. And it sounds like it's about a professor who is divorced, filled with desire, but lacking in passion. Sounds messy and kind of sad, so I'll more than likely really enjoy this. So Ben, thanks for the pick, and I'll be reading that in November. Other things that I'll be checking out here in the month of November and continuing to read. So the books that I'm actually currently in the middle of is Demon Copperhead by a author that I always forget the name of, but it won a Pulitzer Prize last year, and I am probably 75% of the way through, and I absolutely love this book. I don't really care for the audiobooks. I've been reading it only with my eyeballs. The audiobook, I'm not going to refund it, but I wish I could. I just do not like the narration all that much. The other two books that I'm reading currently are Otherland Book 2, which is River of Blue Flame by Tad Williams. I'm continuing that series very slowly because they're big, chunky books. And then the other one that's very random, and I would love to hear what people's opinions are of this book in the comments, is The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. My friend Fallen Adam has been trying to get me to read David Mitchell for many years, and I decided it was time. Not least of which is because he wrote a foreword in The Left Hand of Darkness for Ursula K. Le Guin's book, and I just thought even the way he wrote the foreword was beautiful. And I can say The Bone Clock's about 200 pages in. I really like it. I really, really like it, so I'm going to need to pick up Cloud Atlas and a few of his other works for sure. I will also definitely be reading The Republic of Thieves, which is book 3 in the Gentleman Bastard series. Murphy is doing like kind of a read-along, I think, over on her channel, and she invited me to read book 3 since I read the first 2 last year. And I will see. I know book 3 in the Gentleman Bastards is pretty much unanimously the least liked. Maybe I'll be able to find something to make people appreciate it more. Maybe. Or maybe I'll think it's also just very mid. Who knows? Thank you so much for checking out this video. I know that time is short, and the fact that you spend it here watching these videos means a whole hell of a lot to me. And if you like the video, you can hit like. If you dislike, you can hit dislike. If you loved it, think about subscribing. There's a Patreon and description. It's optional, but always appreciated. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons, especially my Kingsguard, which include Bridger, Zan, Adam K, Amel, Curtis L, Jonathan J, Prithvi, Eric B, Chadia, Steve Talks Books, Taylor D, Matthias D, Carlos, Yolanda, Amanda L, John C, John, Garrick, Evie, Henrik, Benjamin C, Sebastian M, Frank C, C. Scott, Jacob Wade, Darren, Jobot, Terrence F, Michael B, Lauren M, Nicholas E, Kai C, Kev, Ryan, Jay, Jennifer M, Shad, Amanda V, Ikaika, RJ, Pat S, Stuart C, Oscar A, Derry, and Tanner, and Scrimboli Bones. Thank you all so much. You're the best.